$200. My last. I handed them to a vendor at a street fair at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in exchange for a glass globe the size of a basketball inside which sat a dead city. Why? Honestly, I don't know. Something about it stopped me. Not the craftsmanship, though. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Streets thin as thread towers. Music, no taller than my thumbnail. A harbor with ships frozen mid-sail. Not the price, which was absurdly low for something that intricate. It was the vendor himself. Old, calm, in a way that felt like the absence of something rather than the presence of it. He said, "Be careful with the balance." I said, "What balance?" He was already walking away. I carried the globe home on the bus, both arms wrapped around it, and set it on my kitchen table. It fit perfectly, which music was strange. My table is an odd size. I stood there looking at it for a few minutes. The city inside was completely still. No lights, no movement, just perfect miniature architecture under glass, suspended in a faint amber liquid that didn't slosh when I moved the globe. I went to bed at 10 o'clock. Couldn't sleep. Lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the word balance and what it was supposed to mean. At 2 a.m., I got up, went to the kitchen, and lifted the dome. The flash was white. Then everything system initialization. A voice not heard. Exactly. Understood. Like reading text that appears directly in your head. Formatted. Cold. Precise. Welcome. New administrator. World designation. Arcfall. Revision 7. Active factions detected. 5. Balance. Music. Counter 47 out of 100. Status critical action required. Select management faction. Note balance will continue to decay until stabilization protocols are activated. Current decay rate -1 per 6 hours. Below that, a map, or not a map exactly, a living overhead view of the world inside the globe rendered in my field of vision as if projected onto the air in front of me. I could see the whole thing. North, music, south, east, west, territories, borders, color-coded zones, a harbor, a forest so dense it looked solid. Steppe stre with red movement markers. Swamp land in the south, ruins in the east, unlabeled. A gray ring of neutral ground with a circular structure in its center. Below the map, 5 cards appeared. Faction select humans Arcros bonuses plus 30% diplomacy trade networks religious influence penalties weakest standing army of the 5 factions starting influence points IP 25 notes open governance new administrator accepted without precondition elves a story forest bonuses music magic reconnaissance stealth operations penalties isolationist monarchy does not trade externally starting IP 20 notes probability of new administrator acceptance 4%. Closed session monarchy external gods not recognized. Music, OCS GAC steps bonuses strongest military force. Berserker units battle rage multipliers penalties -50% to all diplomacy. Hostile by default starting IP 15 notes. New god accepted only after victory in the blood arena. Your current arena rating 0. Trolls Mergrad bogs bonuses. Superior fortification. Construction speed. Defensive resilience penalties. Slow unit movement. Low strategic adaptability. Starting IP 18 notes. Neutral expansion policy. Non-aggressive unless provoked. Eastern ruins bonuses. Locked penalties. Locked starting IP. Notes. Requires 300 IP to unlock. Data corrupted. Music. I stared at the elves for a solid 10 seconds. Magic. Reconnaissance. Stealth. That's the one you pick. Music. If you're thinking in terms of power, right? It sounds like the winning faction. It reads like the winning faction. Then I read the footnote again. Probability of new administrator acceptance 4%. I tried the Orcs Blood arena rating 0. I looked at the Trolls slow fine, but their bonus is defensive, and I didn't even know yet what I needed to defend against. I looked at the humans 25 starting points weakest army, and the one critical note that none of the other factions shared. New administrator accepted without precondition. No arena. Music. No closed monarchy. No civil war I needed to win first. Music, just accept me because humans accept things because they're desperate enough or hopeful enough. Music, or too disorganized to refuse. I selected humans not because I wanted to, because it was the only door that was already open. First view of the world, the map expanded. Details sharpened. I could hear faintly, not sound exactly, but the impression of it transmitted through the interface, wind, cartwheels on stone, the echo of a hammer from somewhere in a blacksmith district. The overview resolved into 5 regions. North Adrian Forest. Solid canopy. Fog of war active. No data. West, Garrick Steppes. Red movement markers constant. 3 subzones color-coded by clan. Center City State of Arcos. Capital population marker 3,800. Markets Temple Garrison South Merid Boggs slow expansion. Stone fortification in progress at northern border. East Ruins system designation data unavailable. Red marker stationary. Boundary the was test neutral. Music. Ground circular structure at center the arena. Then the system gave me the faction status summary. Current conditions at start humans Aros grain stores approximately. Music. 3 months Regent Marinage 60 acting authority over minor air army. 200 soldiers 40 currently ill, with fever temple empty, 1 aging priest no active alien sciences. Elves. Adrian observing. No offensive movement. Reason unknown. OCS. Garrick High Warlord died 7 days ago. 3 clan succession conflict active. Clans. Red Fawn. Greystone. Black Shadow. All raiding externally for resources. Trolls. Maregrad. Northern expansion. Stone fortress under construction near Arcos southern border. Intent unknown. Non-aggressive. Eastern ruins data unavailable. Balance 47/100. First crisis already in progress. I put my hands flat on the table. The globe sat between them, glowing faintly now. Amber, music, light. The city inside alive in a way it hadn't been 4 hours ago. The harbor lights were on. Something small moved through the market district. 25 influence points. Weakest army, no allies, a regent who sounded like a problem, a priest praying into a void. 46 soldiers, and a balance counter draining 6 points every day. The vendor had said balance like it was a warning, like it was the only thing that mattered. Now I understood why. I leaned down until my forehead was almost touching the glass. All right, I said to no one, to all of them, to the tiny lit city on my kitchen table. Let's see what you've got. The 4 channels. The system didn't give me a tutorial. It gave me a menu for options appeared in the interface, floating in that same projected text space just above the globe, formatted like a control panel designed by someone who assumed I already knew what I was doing. Administrator interaction channels. 1. God's gaze, cost, free function. Observe any point on the map. Hear surface-level speech. Read shallow emotional state of individuals. Primary reconnaissance tool. Limitation. Observation only. No influence. 2. Omens. Cost 2 to 8 IP per use. Scaled to magnitude. Function minor miracles through natural channels. Favorable weather. Lucky hunt. Found water source. Hidden path revealed. No direct intervention. Suggestion only. Limitation. Cannot override free will. Effect is probabilistic. 3. Profit cost requires agent with faith. Rating 50+ function. Direct. Music. Word transmission through chosen mortal. Agent speaks. People listen. Full message fidelity. Limitation. Agent must exist and be willing. Faith degrades. Music. If messages contradict agent's values. 4. Arena cost. Command points. CP. Minimum 15 CP per entry. Function. Administrator may temporarily embody a champion avatar of chosen faction. Fight. Negotiate. Scout. Music. In person inside the world. Warning. If avatar is defeated in the arena, administrator loses 30% of total accumulated IP. Note, this is the highest cost and highest risk channel. Use with full awareness of consequences. I read through it twice. Then I read the arena, music, entry a 3rd time. Wait, I can go in there personally into this miniature world sitting on my kitchen table. The system didn't elaborate. It simply noted embodiment available. I decided not to press that button yet. I wasn't sure what embodiment meant physically, whether I'd black out at the table, whether my body would be here or there, whether there was even a place in the way I understood places. The system had given me no information on the mechanics of it, just available. Fine. Later, I had 25 IP in a city with 3 months of grain. I started with what I could afford. God's gaze, reconnaissance. I focused on Arcros. The sensation was difficult to describe, not like watching a video feed. More like memory, like being somewhere you've been before and can recall with perfect clarity the texture of a stone wall, the smell of a bread oven, the specific quality of afternoon light in a market square. I was not there, but I perceived it completely. The city had 4 districts. The harbor sat at the southeastern edge, small but functional, fishing boats mostly, 2 merchant vessels at anchor. The market district ran through the center, active, crowded, merchants arguing at stalls, children running between carts. The temple district in the northwest, 1 building, old stone, its doors open onto an empty courtyard. The garrison sat at the northern wall, a square compound, wooden barracks, training yard, stables. I started with the people who mattered. Regent Marin, age 60. He was in his office on the 2nd floor of the administrative hall, a narrow room with 2 mini-maps on the walls and a window that overlooked the garrison. He sat at his desk with both hands flat on a document, staring at it without reading. His hands were trembling, not from age. The rest of him was still. It was specific, intentional trembling, the kind the body produces when the mind is working very hard on something it doesn't want to admit. I read his surface state: fear, calculation, resentment. Deeper, the system gave me a shallow emotional snapshot. Not full thoughts, just the shape of them. He was afraid of losing control. Not of the orcs, not of the grain shortage, of the heir. A 12-year-old boy in a room down the hall, and Marin was terrified of him growing up because a grown heir didn't need a regent. I filed that away and moved on. Priest Edo, age 70. He was in the temple alone, as I suspected. The courtyard had been empty. He knelt on bare stone in front of an altar that held a single unlit candle and a clay bowl of water that had been sitting there long enough to collect dust at the rim. He was praying. He had been praying to nothing for 40 years. The system confirmed it. No previous administrator, no divine signal, no response of any kind. The temple's faith rating had dropped to 12 out of 100. People left offerings out of habit, not belief. But Edito was still here, still kneeling, still talking to an empty room. I noted his faith rating, 61/00. Personal, stubborn, completely disconnected from the institutional number. That was interesting. Market district general merchants were complaining. Not to each other exactly. To the heir, the way people complain when they've been complaining so long. It no longer requires an audience. Western supply roads were unsafe. Orc raiding parties, not armies, just bands. 30 to 50 fighters from the Red Fawn clan had hit 3 village convoys in the last 2 weeks. Dried goods, livestock, 1 cartload of iron. Small losses individually. Cumulative, they were starting to bite. The garrison, 200 soldiers. 40 were in the medical barracks. Fever, running for 11 days, 2 deaths already. The remaining 160 were nominally combat ready, which meant they were healthy. Not that they were prepared. The garrison commander was a competent man named Breath, who knew exactly how thin his numbers were and was very carefully not saying so to anyone above him. Marin had called a command meeting for tomorrow morning. I checked the meeting's likely agenda through the system's predictive model, a feature I hadn't noticed before, a small tab that read probability forecast. Regent Marin, 87% probability of proposing a punitive military expedition to the western villages against Red Fawn raiding parties. I stared at that for a moment. 160 able soldiers against a Red Fawn raiding force that when consolidated numbered over 500 in the field outside city walls with a 6 supply chain and no allied support. I checked Marin's surface emotional state again through God's gaze, and there it was under the fear and calculation. Relief. Preemptive quiet relief, the kind of man feels when he has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the moment to announce it. He wanted the army to leave, not to win. To leave because if the garrison marched west, Marin remained behind as the sole authority in Aros. The heir was 12. The city guard answered to the regent. For however long the campaign lasted, weeks, possibly months, Marin would be functionally king. He wasn't stupid. He was a particular kind of smart that is worse than stupid. Strategic in service of the wrong goal. I had 25 IP. Stopping the expedition directly would cost 15 via Omen. A dramatic enough sign to override a military decision required significant expenditure. That was more than half my budget. I'd be left with 10, and the crisis would still be there tomorrow in a different form. I needed a cheaper solution. I looked at Edito, the water omen. The system had a terrain overlay. I activated it and scanned the land east of the city, a/4 mile of scrub and hard-packed earth between the eastern wall and the beginning of the rocky foothills. The overlay highlighted subsurface features. There 200 m east of the city wall, a water vein, shallow. The system rated it accessible. Minimum excavation required. The city didn't know it was there. It had always been there. I sent Edito a dream. Cost 4 IP. It wasn't dramatic. The system didn't give me the ability to stage divine cinema. No parting clouds, no thunderous visions. An omen at this price point worked like this. I chose a recipient. I chose a true thing to convey, and the system threaded it into their sleeping mind as intuition, not instruction. Feeling. The sense of knowing something without knowing how you know it. Edito woke before dawn with dirt on his mind. The specific sensation of dry earth giving way to wet. Direction east of the wall. Distance close. He lay there for an hour, I think, talking himself into it. Then he got up, found a shovel in the temple storage, and walked out the eastern gate in the gray pre-morn morning light like a man trying not to think too hard about what he was doing. He found the water at 210 m, hit the vein at 4 foot down, which for a 70-year-old man with a single shovel took most of the morning. By midday, he was standing in a hole with water pooling around his sandals, laughing in a way that I don't think he'd done in years. By afternoon, half the market district had come to see. By evening, the temple courtyard had people in it for the first time in a decade. The profit, the faith rating for Arcos shifted 12:31/118 hours. I watched it move in real time, a small counter in the corner of the interface ticking upward as the city processed what had happened. The system notification agent threshold reached. Edo Faith rating 7,300. Profit channel now available through this agent. First use is free. I used it immediately. Not for a speech. Not for theology. I sent Edito one image clear and simple while he sat alone in the newly crowded temple that evening. Marin's face. And beside it, soldiers marching west and a road that ended in red. Edito was not a political man. He didn't think in terms of power or strategy, but he understood this is important. This is real, and this is mine to carry. The next morning before Marin's command meeting, Edito arrived at the administrative hall and asked to speak. Marin, startled and slightly afraid of the sudden public reverence around the priest, let him in. Edito delivered it as prophecy, quiet, specific, without theatrics. The army that leaves will not return whole. The city needs its soldiers. The god of this place has spoken. He believed every word. That was the point. Marin was superstitious in the specific way that calculating men are superstitious. Privately, intensely unwilling to admit it. He postponed the expedition officially, pending further assessment of the military situation. Actually, because an old priest looked him in the eye and said the army would not return, and Marin's hands had started trembling again. First week results: IP spent 4 water omen plus 0 profit. First use free equals 4 total IP. Gain plus 12 from city faith. Increase over 7 days. Net position 25 minus 4 plus 12 is equal to 33 IP. Balance counter 4,750. Stabilizing slightly, not solved. Stabilizing. Marin's expedition postponed indefinitely. Edito active agent profit channel open faith 73 of 100. Western raids ongoing unresolved. Red Fong raiding party still hitting supply roads. Eastern grain reserves 3 months unchanged. Arena not entered. CP still at 0. New agent network 1. Edito insufficient. The system presented a new notification at the end of the first week. Arena open tournament announced. Participating factions: orcs, all 3 clans, trolls, humans, not invited. Next scheduled event, 14 game days. I looked at that for a long time. Not invited. Which meant no political standing in the interfaction council, no trade rights in the neutral zone, no voice in any decision that happened outside Erosa's walls. The arena wasn't just a fighting ground. I was beginning to understand that it was the space where everything that mattered got decided, and humans weren't in the room. CP0, I needed to start building toward the arena. But first, I needed more than one old priest. Edito found them himself mostly. That was the thing about genuine believers. They didn't wait for instructions. They looked around at the people nearest to them and started talking. The first was a girl named Lena, 17, daughter of a cloth merchant whose stall sat 3 rows from the temple gate. She had been in the crowd the day Dito pulled water from the eastern ground. And unlike most of the crowd, who processed the event through the framework of miracle and moved on, she had walked the 200 meters herself, crouched at the edge of the excavation, and studied the soil profile. When Dito found her there the following morning, she asked him how he had known exactly where to dig. He told her the god had shown him in a dream. She asked what the dream looked like. He described it. She nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they're deciding whether a thing is credible rather than whether it is comfortable. She started coming to the temple. I watched her through God's gaze for 4 days before I formed a read on her. Skeptic, genuine, not performative. She believed in Dito because Dito had produced a result she could verify with her own hands. She was not convinced of me specifically. She was willing to operate on provisional trust, which in practical terms was more useful than faith. Faith could be shaken by contradiction. Provisional trust just updated. Her father's trade connections reached south through the Troll borderlands and east toward the mining settlements. She knew prices, routes, which roads washed out in spring, which garrison commanders accepted small gifts, and which ones logged every transaction. She was in short exactly what I needed and had no idea I was watching her. The second was R. I kept the name as the system rendered it, though the pronunciation was closer to a short grunt than anything melodic. Former garrison soldier discharged 8 months ago after a training injury left him with a shoulder that worked at 70%. He was 32, stocky with the specific kind of anger that develops in men who were very good at their function and then had their function removed. He had walked into the temple the morning after the water discovery and stood in the back for a long time without kneeling, without speaking, without doing anything a person conventionally does in a temple. Then he had walked out. He came back the next day and the day after. On the 4th day, Dito asked him what he was looking for. Ron said, "Something that deserves it." Dito brought him into the circle. The third was Mika, 12 years old, son of a seamstress in the harbor district. He was the complication I hadn't planned for and couldn't have designed better if I'd tried. The system flagged him with a notation I hadn't seen before on any other individual in Aros. Sensitivity rating 94/00. Direct channel candidate. I didn't fully understand what that meant until the first time I attempted to send Mika an impression. Not a dream, not a full omen, just a directional nudge the way I'd done with Dito in the water. With Dito, it had been like speaking into a cup pressed against a wall. With Mika, it was like opening a door into the same room. He heard me, not as intuition, not as a feeling that needed 12 hours to resolve into action. He looked up from whatever he was doing, mending a torn net on the harbor dock, and said quietly to the air, "I hear you. What do you need?" I had not expected that. The system hadn't fully prepared me for it. I sent the simplest possible response, a single image, the temple, a direction, and he stood up, folded the net, and walked there. From that point, Mika became something different from the other agents. With Dito, I worked through dreams and impressions, slow and filtered through an old man's interpretation. With Lena, I worked through Dito as intermediary, careful, and indirect. With Ron the same, but Mika was a direct line, clear two-way, almost effortless. The cost was also different. Sending through Mika ran at roughly 1/3 the IP of a standard omen. The system noted this without explanation. I suspected it had something to do with the sensitivity rating, with whatever made Mika different from the other 3,800 people in Aros. I didn't examine it too carefully. I had a city to keep alive in 14 days until a tournament I hadn't been invited to. I focused on the tournament. The system had given me the arena's structural information in a sidebar I'd mostly skimmed during the first week chaos. I went back and read it properly. The arena of the Waste sat in the neutral zone between all faction territories, a stone coliseum, ancient, predating the current factions by an unspecified number of centuries. Its governance was autonomous, a council of 3 arena masters who recognized no faction authority and enforced exactly one rule, which was that the results of sanctioned combat were binding. What was decided in the arena stayed decided. Territory, trade rights, political recognition, interfaction council seats, all of it could be staked and won or lost on the arena floor. Humans had not competed in living memory. The system's records showed the last human participation was 4 administrative cycles ago, for previous administrators, for successive eras of the world's history. Each cycle the humans had declined or been excluded or lacked the standing to enter. Over generations, this had calcified into assumption. Humans don't fight in the arena. Humans are not that kind of people. The other factions had stopped extending invitations because the answer was always no. To receive an invitation now required formal sponsorship from at least one participating faction. Someone already at the table had to stand up and say, "Let them in." I looked at the map. The trolls were building their fortress at the southern border. Slow and methodical and unbothered by the orc succession crisis the way large, heavily armored creatures are generally unbothered by the problems of faster, louder ones. Gorm, the troll chieftain, the system provided his name without elaboration, had not moved from the construction site in 11 days. He supervised personally every stone. I sent Lena south. It cost me 8 IP total, 6 for the omens that made her path safe, smoothed the border crossing, ensured the troll centuries read her as a traitor rather than a threat, and 2 for the specific moment during her meeting with Gorm when I needed to put the right information in her mouth at the right time. She didn't know I was there. She thought she'd remembered the detail herself. Gorm received her in a tent beside the construction site, sitting on a block of uncut granite because the tent held no furniture large enough for him. He was exactly as the system had characterized him, slow, deliberate, built like a geological feature that had decided to become ambulatory. He listened to Lena's opening offer, Arco's stone, from the eastern quarries in exchange for safe transit rights through troll territory with the specific quality of attention that very large, very patient beings give to very small, very fast ones. Polite, completely unmoved, Lena pivoted to pricing. Gorm remained unmoved. She offered exclusivity on the eastern quarry output. Gorm pointed out correctly that the trolls had their own stone. She was running out of angles. I could feel her composure starting to strain at the edges. She was good, but she was 17, and this was the largest person she had ever sat across a negotiating table from. I spent 1 IP and gave her the red fawn. Not dramatically, just the information pressed into her awareness as a fact she suddenly found herself certain of. The Red Fawn clan's raiding routes ran west along the Arco's border, and the westernmost arc of those routes passed within 9 miles of the troll settlement at Ngrad's northern edge. She said it out loud. The Red Fawn raiding corridor runs within 9 miles of your northern settlement, and watch Gorm's face. The troll chieftain went very still, the specific stillness of a large creature that has just recalculated something. He already knew about the Red Fawn. He had not known about the corridor proximity. The succession war had everyone's attention on the clan's internal conflict. Nobody had mapped the external drift of the raiding patterns. Nobody except me because I had a bird's-eye view of the entire map and all the time in the world to watch red movement markers shift across terrain. The deal closed in 20 minutes. Arco's stone and raiding route intelligence updated weekly in exchange for transit rights. And one additional item that Lena negotiated herself, which she hadn't been briefed on, and which surprised me. Gorm's word given formally and in front of his construction foreman that the trolls would speak for human participation at the next arena gathering. She walked back to Aro's in the late afternoon with transit rights, a standing intelligence sharing agreement, and an arena sponsorship. I noted in my internal accounting 8 IP spent, troll alliance established, arena access granted. I let myself feel pleased about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then the system posted the next notification. Arena minor bout scheduled 3 days. Format individual combat, open entry. Stakes glory ranking points. Command point cost for administrator embodiment 15 CP. Note this is an unofficial bout. No political stakes. Note defeat penalty applies. Minus 30% IP on avatar loss. I had 15 CP, exactly 15. Edito had activated a military prayer rite in the garrison 3 days prior. Standard blessing before weapons practice. Temple was involved now. Garrison had started attending services mostly because Ron was there, and Ron had credibility with fighting men in a way Edito alone did not. The CP had accumulated from the ritual. 15 exact sitting there. I could use all of it. Enter the minor bout. Lose half my IP if the avatar fell, or I could wait for the major tournament in 11 days and go in with more resources, more preparation, a cleaner strategic picture. I thought about what Lena had said Gorm told her off the record while they were finalizing terms. The other faction chieftains would be at the major tournament. All of them. The orc clan leaders, the troll delegation, the elves, if they chose to attend. It was the first event since the High Warlord's death significant enough to draw everyone into the same space. That was too important to go into blind. I needed to understand the arena first. The layout, the physics of the avatar, the crowd dynamics, how the other factions' fighters moved. I pressed embodiment. The transition took 5 seconds and felt like nothing I could accurately describe. One moment I was at my kitchen table with my hands around the glass dome. Then dark, then the smell of hot stone and dry air, and something underneath both of those that was older mineral, the specific smell of an enclosed space that had held violent human effort for centuries. I was standing in a preparation area beneath the arena floor. Stone walls, torch light, the distant rumble of a crowd above. My body, the avatar, was 180 centimeters, leather armor, short sword on my hip. The system interface was still present, overlaid on my vision like a transparent screen. In the upper right corner, health 100/00. In the upper left, a small map of the arena floor above, circular, 20 diameter, 3 stone outcroppings in the center. The system had named the avatar automatically, the Wanderer. I moved my hand. My hand moved. The leather of the glove creased at the knuckle exactly as it should. The sword's weight was real. The stone floor under my boots was real. This is insane, I said quietly to no one. My voice sounded like my voice. I walked up the ramp into the light. The opponent was an orc from Greystone clan. His name, for the interface's automatic identification, was Dur 2.2M, an axe that was technically a tree that had not yet been fully processed into lumber. His stats appeared in a sidebar the moment I focused on him. Strength 8,900. Defense 7,100. Speed 3,400. Vulnerability notes: right knee previous fracture inadequately healed. Lateral movement right to left causes compensatory weight shift to left leg. Response to feints toward his left is delayed by approximately 0.4 seconds. The crowd was mostly orcs. They were not here to watch a human. They were here to watch Durg, who had apparently won his last 7 bouts. The human was an unexpected entry, uninvited, standing in their arena wearing borrowed leather and looking at their champion like he was a problem to be solved rather than a man to be afraid of. Dur didn't bother with preamble. He came straight across the arena floor, axe already moving. I went left, sharp, committed. No hesitation. The direction his lateral response was slowest. Dur's weight shifted wrong. He corrected, but the correction caused him a full step. And by the time he'd reoriented, I was already past his right side and dropping low. I hit the knee. Not hard enough to break it. I didn't have the strength for that. Hard enough to buckle it. Dur went down on one leg with a sound that was less a grunt and more a geological event. And the crowd, which had been producing the ambient roar of 700 people watching someone they expected to win, went suddenly and completely quiet. I stepped back. Dur straightened slowly and looked at me. He was not finished. I hadn't expected him to be, but the dynamic of the bout had changed in the first 15 seconds, and both of us knew it, and so did everyone watching from the stone seats above. He came again, slower, more careful. I read the pattern, weight on the left, axe angled to force me right toward the wall. He was adjusting good. I moved right, let him think the wall was working, then cut back left across his front. He overcommit on the angle, left side exposed for one step. I hit him in the ribs. He hit me in the arm with his elbow, not the axe, which was both an accident and a sign of how close I'd gotten. Pain, real specific, radiating up to the shoulder. Health 8,400. Dur stumbled. One knee down again. This time he didn't immediately rise. The arena master called it. The silence held for another 3 seconds. Then the Greystone section of the crowd began making a sound that was not applause. The Arco section, Lena and Ron and 2 of the garrison soldiers who had followed out of curiosity, made a sound that technically was. I walked back to the preparation area below and stood in the torchlight for a moment, breathing. The interface confirmed about complete. Result, win. CP, earned 20. Arena ranking established. I noted what mattered. They had seen a human move in a way humans were not supposed to move. Not because I was stronger, because I could read the information they couldn't see. The major tournament was in 11 days. That was enough time. The grain problem was not going to solve itself. 3 months of reserves sounds like time. It isn't. Factor in the Western raids cutting supply convoys, the garrison eating at military ration levels, and the 300% increase in temple attendance that had somehow translated into a 15% increase in daily bread consumption. People pray better when they aren't hungry, and apparently, they celebrate answered prayers by eating. And 3 months became closer to 2, maybe less. I spent the better part of a night cycle running God's gaze across the map, looking for options. The system had flagged 3 when I first surveyed the territory. A subterranean river under the eastern desert, accessible but expensive at 50 IP to activate. A trade route south through Troll territory now viable since Lena had secured transit rights, and the western farmlands which were the natural answer, and the one currently being eaten alive by Red Fong raiding parties. 50 IP for the underground river was out of the question. I had 41. I wasn't spending everything on infrastructure when a tournament in 11 days could end my political existence in the neutral zone before it had properly started. The western farmlands required solving the Red Fawn problem first, which required solving the Orc succession crisis, which was the kind of multi-step chain that would take weeks. I didn't have that left south, the Troll transit route. Lena had already done the hard part. I sent her back. The logic was straightforward. Aros produced cloth and worked metal. The harbor fishing operations generated secondary goods. The Trolls didn't bother with dried fish and salt, things that traveled well. The Troll settlements in the southern bogs produced grain from the managed wetland fields they'd been cultivating for 3 generations, and fish from the bog channels, and a root vegetable the system translated as something roughly equivalent to a turnip that apparently grew in quantities the Trolls considered a nuisance byproduct of their construction projects. Nobody wanted the turnips. The Trolls had too many. Aros would take the turnips. I gave Lena the overview through Edito, let her build the specific terms herself. She was better at pricing than I was, which was both true and a function of the fact that I had never actually negotiated the price of a turnip, and watched through God's gaze as she made the second trip south in a week, this time with 2 of her father's merchant associates and a written inventory of Arco's harbor production from the last quarter. Gorm received her without ceremony and without the testing patience of the first meeting. She had given him accurate intelligence on the Red Fawn corridor. That had value in troll accounting. Someone who had given you accurate information once was someone you listened to again. The negotiation took 4 hours. I spent 3 IP on a single well-timed omen-favorable weather. A light wind from the south that I nudged 3 degrees to carry the smell of the bog grain fields toward the meeting tent during a moment when the numbers were stalling, and watched Lena close the deal without further assistance. The first convoy would move in 6 days. Grain, dried fish, the turnips. Aros would send cloth and metal and salt in exchange. 8 months of grain reserves once it arrived from 2 to 8 in one trade agreement. I added 12 IP from the city faith increase, the weekly accumulation from Edito's now standing congregation, and netted the omen expenditure against it. IP 62. I had climbed back up, not comfortable, but no longer precarious. The balance counter moved 64 out of 100. I registered that, held it for a moment. 64. When I lifted the dome, it had been 47, draining 6 points every day. Now it was climbing slowly, inconsistently, responding to things I couldn't always predict. The water discovery had moved it. The Troll Alliance had moved it. Something about the city feeling less afraid had moved it. The system didn't give me a formula. It gave me a direction. I noted the direction and moved on because Marin had just done something I hadn't anticipated and should have. He appointed a high priest. The notification came through the system as a political event flag faction internal governance change. And I referenced it immediately through God's gaze. Marin was in his office again. Same position, same maps on the walls, but the trembling hands were still this time. He was signing a document with the specific deliberateness of a man who had decided something and was enjoying the decision. The new high priest was named Korn, 28 years old, educated at a minor administrative college in the Harbor District, ambitious in the specific clean-edged way that young men are ambitious when they haven't yet had to pay for it. He was Marin's man. The system's relationship overlay confirmed it. A solid line of political loyalty running between them recently formed, clearly transactional. Marin had offered Korn the position. Korn had accepted without conditions. Edito was removed from official temple authority by the end of the same day. Not expelled, Marin wasn't stupid enough to publicly exile the priest who had found water and stopped the army from marching into a defeat, just officially superseded. Korn took the temple keys, the administrative title, the formal right to conduct city rites. Edito was left with his congregation and no institutional standing. I watched Marin sign the final document and felt something I could only describe as a grudging respect I didn't want to have. He'd read the situation correctly. The temple was the only power center in Arcos he didn't control, and he'd moved on at the moment it became significant enough to threaten him. He hadn't been fast. He'd been patient, which was worse. He'd waited until the water discovery settled from miracle into fact, until the political capital of responding to it had already been harvested, and then he'd installed his own men in the building. It was well done. I still needed to stop it. The direct options were unappealing. Striking Korn with an omen dramatic enough to discredit him would cost 25 IP and would make me a god of punishment, which was not the theological brand I was trying to establish in Aros. People pray longer to gods they love than to gods they fear, and I needed the faith generation to keep running. I could work to flip Korn. He was ambitious. The relationship with Marin was transactional. That meant it had a price point. But I had no direct channel to him, and approaching him through Edito or the other agents would telegraph the attempt. Too visible, which left Mika. Mika had no official status. He was 12, the seamstress's son, the strange child who said things at the harbor sometimes that people repeated later without quite knowing why. Marin couldn't issue an edict against children. The city didn't have a law against a boy standing in the market square and speaking in the particular quiet way that made people stop and listen. Not because he was performing, but because he seemed to genuinely have something to say. I fed Mika 2 things over 3 days. The first was a question pressed in gently during his morning walk to the docks. Why does a new priest need the old priest to have no authority? The second was an image. The night after Korn's face beside Marin, and between them the scales from the temples, just as Fresco waited. Mika processed both things in the slow, thorough way he processed everything. On the 4th day, he stood in the southern end of the market square at midday during the busiest hour and said to nobody in particular, "The temple has 2 priests now. One found water, one found a patron." He said it once without emphasis and went back to the harbor. By evening, it was the most repeated sentence in 3 districts. Marin heard about it the following morning. He summoned Edito, which was a mistake. It gave Edo an audience with the regent that Marin had been carefully avoiding and told him to control the boy. Edito said truthfully that he did not control Mika. Nobody controlled Ma. Mika was a child who sometimes said things. Marin tried to have Mika formally restricted from the market square. The city guard captain, who had a daughter, Mika's age, and had been attending the temple since the water discovery, came back with a report explaining that restricting a child from a public market on the grounds that he spoke without authorization was going to be very difficult to enforce and very easy to describe to the other merchants in unflattering terms. Marin withdrew the order. The city noticed the withdrawal. Cities always notice when the authority retreats from something small because it tells them what the authority is afraid of. Korn, watching all of this from the newly reorganized temple office, began very privately, very carefully, to reconsider his position. I could see it through God's gaze and the quality of his stillness when he was alone. The specific immobility of a man who is checking his assumptions against new information. He had aligned with Marin because Marin held power. That calculus was not changing. But the calculus of where power was flowing, that was starting to shift. I noted Korn as a candidate and left him alone. Pressure would close the door. Patience would leave it open. The tournament was in 7 days, and I needed to understand what I was walking into. I ran God's gaze across every faction simultaneously over 2 long observation sessions, building a picture the system static summaries hadn't given me. The Orc clans were still technically at war with each other, but the tempo had changed since the minor bout. Something about a human winning in the arena, not the politics of it, not the formal implications, just the raw sensory fact of it, had apparently been the shared experience that cut through clan rivalry. Grudges require comfortable circumstances to maintain. All 3 clan war councils had more urgent things to discuss. The Red Fang had the largest force, 560 berserkers, fast, no armor, the kind of unit that wins in the first minute or loses in the 5th when the rage burns out. Their champion for the tournament was a fighter named Varric, who had won his last 14 bouts by killing his opponents before the 4-minute mark. The system noted his speed rating at 91 out of 100 and his self-preservation instinct at 23 out of 100. Useful information. Greystone was what I'd already encountered in miniature with Durg. Heavily armored, strong, slow. Their tournament team would be a wall. The challenge was going through the wall, not around it, because the arena's bordered floor eliminated most of the lateral options. Black Shadow was the one I watched longest. The third clan operated differently from the other two. Less berserker mentality, more precision. Their fighters used distraction, feigned retreats, contact toxins on weapon edges. The system flagged 3 of their tournament entries with a substance use notation. I filed that away. The elves emerged from the Historian Forest 2 days into my observation period. It was the first time I had seen them move in numbers. 12 individuals robed, moving through the northern edge of the neutral zone toward the arena with the specific, unhurried pace of people who have never once in their lives been late to anything, because time has always adjusted to accommodate them. Their champion was named Selen. The system gave me his record. 41 arena bouts, 41 wins, the most recent 23 by surrender rather than injury, which told me more about the quality of his magic than a victory count would have. His stats when I managed to get God's gaze locked on him through the trees. Strength 45 out of 100, defense 30/00, speed, magic 9900. I stared at that last number for a while. Then I went looking for the vulnerability and found it buried in a small notation the system had appended to his technique profile. Sustained spell casting requires 2.1 seconds of uninterrupted concentration. Rapid small discharge magic minor spells low power could be cast in 0.4 seconds, but carried proportionally reduced effect. He was either a siege weapon or a rapid skirmisher, not both simultaneously. To function as a siege weapon, he needed 2 seconds of space. To function as a skirmisher, he needed to accept reduced damage output. I thought about what it would mean to deny him both. Gorm's contribution to the tournament was a young troll named Brock, 18 years old by troll reckoning, which the system noted was approximately equivalent to a large, enthusiastic 11-year-old by the measure of emotional maturity. He was enormous, even by troll standards. His fighting style was described by the system as direct, which I understood to mean he walked at things until they stopped being a problem. Gorm had told Lena in the transit rights discussion that he was sending Brock to get experience. He expected the boy to lose. He was not wrong. I was entering the tournament with Ron listed as the official human entrant. The system required a named fighter for registration and my own embodiment as the actual variable. 20 CP for embodiment in a sanctioned major bout. I had 28. If I entered and won the team phase, the system projected a 40 CP return from ranking points alone plus the political weight of a human team advancing. If I entered and lost in the final round, I lost 30% of my IP. I had 62. 30% was 18. I would drop to 44. Not fatal, uncomfortable. I thought about Selen's 99 out of 100 magic rating. I thought about Varric's 911-100 speed and 23-100 self-preservation. I thought about the 2 C-cell needed to charge a full strike and what a person who could read those numbers in real time could do with 2 seconds of forewarning. I made the decision I had already mostly made and spent the next 4 days having her walk me through the garrison training yard's combat drills via God's gaze. Not because the avatar would need the physical practice, but because I needed to understand how trained fighters moved, what the difference looked like between a committed strike and a feint, how much of combat at this level was body, and how much was decision. Ron was a good teacher without knowing he was teaching anyone. He pushed the garrison soldiers hard, compensating with one shoulder for what the injury had taken from the other, and he corrected form with the specific irritated precision of someone who had been very good at something and found mediocrity physically offensive. I watched 300 hours of training through God's gaze in 4 days. On the morning of the tournament, I checked the numbers one last time. IP 62, CP 28, balance 64, agents in place 4, Troll Alliance holding, grain convoy 3 days out from Aros. The city was in better shape than it had been when I lifted the dome. Not fixed. Fixed was a fantasy, but functional and moving in a direction. Marin was a problem I hadn't solved. The corn situation was in suspension. The western raids were still running. The ruins on the eastern edge of the map were still flagged data unavailable. and I had made a decision quietly not to look too closely at them until I had more resources than I currently did. There were things in that direction I wasn't ready to deal with. I pressed embodiment. Dark hot stone. The smell of the arena, which I was beginning to recognize the way you recognize a place you have been to in a dream. Not remembered exactly, but familiar in the body before the mind catches up. The wanderer stood in the preparation hall beneath the arena floor. The interface settled into place across my vision. In the lower left corner, a roster tournament day 1 team bouts. Humans. RO's the Wanderer/Ron, Garrison veteran Sten first match versus Greystone clan. Ron was to my right, checking the edge of his sword for the 4th time. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me since the minor bout. Not suspicion, not quite, but the careful attention of a man who has noticed that something in the person next to him doesn't entirely match the category he'd assigned them to. He said, "You have a plan." I said, "Don't engage them directly. The armor makes them slow. Let them work for it." He looked at me for another moment. Then he nodded. The short, economical nod of a soldier who has decided to trust the briefing, even if he doesn't trust the briefer. The gate opened. The crowd roared. Sunlight hit the arena floor in the flat white early morning way of a sky that hadn't yet decided what kind of day it wanted to be. We walked out. The Greystone fighters came out of the opposite gate the way their clan did everything slowly, deliberately, with the specific confidence of things that have never needed to hurry because nothing has ever moved fast enough to matter. 3 of them full plate, the kind assembled from overlapping pieces of worked iron that covered everything from jaw to ankle, leaving gaps only at the joints, and even those gaps were narrow-backed with leather and chain. Their weapons were not elegant. 2 hammers and a short broad blade, tools designed for stopping motion rather than creating it. The crowd on the Greystone section of the stands recognized their own and produced a deep rhythmic sound, less a cheer than a geological endorsement. I read their stats the moment they cleared the gate. All 3 were clustered. Strength 82 to 88, defense 79 to 84, speed 31 to 36. The gaps at the joints I'd noted on visual resolved into system annotations. Left armpit on the nearest fighter, right knee on the second, the collar junction on the third, where 2 separate pieces of plate met at an angle that required compromise, not weaknesses exactly. Conditional access points that required getting close enough to use them, which was exactly what the armor was designed to prevent. I said to Ron and Sten quietly before the gap between us closed, 3 minutes. Don't let them touch you for 3 minutes. Move constantly. Make them work for every step. Ron said nothing. Sten, who was 44 and had been in the garrison for 20 years and had the specific economy of expression that very experienced soldiers develop, gave me a look that said he understood the arithmetic and didn't love it. The arena master signaled. The crowd noise shifted registers. They came straight at us. No tactics, no formation, just 3 heavy bodies accelerating across 20 m of flat stone, hammers and blade already moving. It was effective against most opponents because most opponents had instincts that read incoming mass as something to meet rather than avoid. And meeting, it was a very fast way to find out how the armor's weight transferred into the person wearing it. We scattered left, right, and I went straight back along the center line, drawing the nearest fighter, the one with the armpit gap, away from the other 2, who had angled for Ron and Sten on the flanks. The crowd, expecting contact, produced a confused murmur. This wasn't how these bouts usually started. The fighter chasing me was named for the system Horst. He was 37, had been Greystone's first-line competitor for 9 years, and had never lost a team bout. His frustration at being led around the arena floor by a human who kept changing direction manifested as a progressive tightening of his grip on the hammer, which the system noted was reducing his swing arc by approximately 8% every 30 seconds as the tendons in his forearm fatigued under the armor's weight distribution. 1 minute 2, I kept moving. Hor kept following on the far side of the arena. Ron was doing something similar with the blade fighter. Not successfully because Ron was not me and did not have a stat overlay, but adequately, which was all I needed. Stan had gotten himself into a corner near one of the stone outcroppings and was using it to limit the 3rd fighter's angles, absorbing minimal contact on his shield and giving nothing back. It was defensive to the point of appearing cowardly. The Greystone crowd was getting loud about it. Let them at the 3-minute mark. I checked Horse's fatigue rating through the interface. 34 out of 100. not exhausted, but working. Swing speed reduced by 12% from peak. The armor, which had weighed exactly the same at the start of the bout, was now costing him something to carry. I stopped retreating, turned to face him directly, which surprised him enough that his next swing came a half step early. The timing was wrong. The weight hadn't fully committed, and I was already inside the arc when the hammer passed through the space where my ribs had been. Left armpit. The gap was exactly where the system had shown it. I didn't have the strength to penetrate iron, but I didn't need to. The gap was leatherback chain, and the point of my sword through leatherback chain into the muscle group beneath it was enough to make Horse's left arm stop cooperating with his intentions. He didn't fall. Greystone fighters didn't fall from one hit, but his left side was compromised, which meant the hammer was a one-armed weapon now, which meant his swing arc had another problem on top of the fatigue. The crowd went quiet in that way crowds do when they've been expecting a particular result and have just had to update. On the left flank, Ron landed the hit I positioned him for 3 exchanges ago. I hadn't guided him directly, had no active channel to run the way I did with Mika, but I had structured his starting position and the retreat pattern to create exactly this geometry if he held the line for 3 minutes. He had held it. The blade fighter turning to compensate for a feint left his right side open for a moment, and Ron was not a man who missed open sides. 2 down, not out. Still fighting both of them, but compromised. The third fighter, the one Stan had been containing near the outcropping, finally abandoned the low-energy strategy and came hard. A genuine charge. All the weight of the armor converted into forward momentum, the kind of thing that ends bouts quickly when it connects. Sten's sidest stepped left, which Sten had been setting up for 90 seconds by subtly shifting his defensive stance to suggest he favored the right. The fighter overcorrected. The outcropping was there. The fighter's shoulder hit stone at speed. The sound was audible from across the arena. The arena master called the bout 20 seconds later when it became clear that all 3 Greystone fighters were functional, but none of them were going to close the math before fatigue finished what injury had started. The Greystone section of the crowd was silent. Not the geological endorsement silence of before, a different quality, the silence of people recalculating something they thought was settled. The historian section, the 12 elves in their robes, seated apart from every other faction, were not silent. They were talking to each other in low voices, and Selen, who I had been watching through the interface's edge vision tracking, had turned to face our section of the arena directly for the first time. I noted that, and walked back to the preparation hall. The other bouts ran without me. I watched through the interface's observer mode, the God's Gaze equivalent translated into arena format, an overhead view, real-time with stat overlays on every active fighter. Red Fong against Brock and the Troll delegation. Varric entered the arena at a speed that made the first 10 seconds look less like a fight and more like a demonstration of what happened when a person with a 91 to 100 speed rating met opponents whose speed ratings were in the low 20s. Brock took 3 hits before he managed to grab Varric's wrist, which was the Troll solution to most speed problems. You couldn't catch them, but if something fast ran into your grip, it stopped being fast. Varric got free. Brock took 2 more hits, but he held the floor for 4 minutes, which was longer than Gorm had expected. And when the bout ended and Brock walked off with a split lip and his dignity roughly intact, Gorm watched from the Troll stands with the specific expression of a man whose investment had underperformed and exceeded expectations simultaneously. Selen against Black Shadow. I watched this one carefully. The Black Shadow team entered with a formation I hadn't seen in the garrison drills, a rotating triangle that kept one fighter always moving towards Selen's peripheral vision while the other 2 held his attention. Clever. Selen recognized it in approximately 4 seconds, which was faster than I would have liked. He didn't try to fight the formation. He charged the center point, put a full 2-cond casting into the fighter directly ahead of him, and removed that fighter from the equation with a strike that left scorch marks on the arena stone. The triangle became a line. The line became 2 fighters and a very large problem. 40 seconds later, the bout was over. 40 seconds. I spent some time sitting with that. The substance use notation the system had flagged on Black Shadow's entries had apparently been a non-factor. You couldn't apply a contact toxin to a fighter who ended the bout in under a minute. Greystone's second team against Black Shadow's second team. Greystone won slowly in the way stone grinding against stone eventually wins. Not through skill or speed, but through the accumulation of pressure. End of day 1. Semifinals tomorrow. Humans against Red Fawn. Elves against Greystone's second team final in the afternoon. I left the embodiment. The transition back was still disorienting. 5 seconds of nothing. Then the kitchen table, the globe, my hands flat on either side of it. The city inside was lit. The harbor lights, the temple, the garrison torches. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a while. Red Fawn. Varric's speed was 91/00. My avatar's speed was somewhere in the middle range. The system hadn't given me a specific number during the minor bout, which I suspected meant it was context-dependent, responsive to decision rather than fixed. The advantage I had wasn't a stat. It was the overlay. I could see what was coming before it arrived. Read the weight distribution, the committed angle, the 0.4-second window before a strike locked in. Against Dirk, that had been enough. Against Hoare and his team, it had been enough. Varric was different. Varric at 91/100 speed meant the window between intention and execution was smaller than anything I'd faced. The overlay would still show me his vulnerabilities. The system always showed vulnerabilities, but seeing a vulnerability and having time to act on it were different problems. I thought about the arena floor, the 3 stone outcroppings in the center, the specific geometry of the space. Then I thought about Varric's other number self-preservation 23/00. He came straight at targets every bout in his record. He had never feinted, never retreated, never taken a defensive position. Not because he was stupid, because he had never needed to. Nothing had been fast enough to punish him for the straight line. I filed that and went to check on the grain convoy through God's gaze. It was 2 days out, moving steadily north through the Troll Transit Corridor. The balance counter read 66. Aros was sleeping. The semi-final against Red Fawn started with Varric. He didn't wait for the arena master's signal. He moved at the sound of the gate before the crowd noise had fully organized itself into something coherent, crossing half the arena floor in the time it took me to register the motion. The system flagged him immediately. Speed 91. Self-preservation 23. Current trajectory center direct. I went right. Not because right was strategically optimal, because right was the direction I was already moving when my body made the decision before my mind finished making it. The avatar's responses were faster than my actual nervous system, linked to the interface in a way I still didn't entirely understand. Varric's axe passed through the space I'd been standing in and hit stone, throwing sparks. He turned in less than a step, already coming back. Behind me, I heard Ron and Sten engaging the other 2 Red Fawn fighters, younger, slower than Varric, but still fast, still carrying the clan's baseline speed advantage over the heavily armored Greystone opponents they've been designed to fight. I had approximately 40% of my attention available for Varric. The rest was running team geometry in the background, tracking Ron's position and Sten's, calculating whether the flanks would hold long enough for me to do what I needed to do with the center. Burr came again. Same angle, center direct axe on the right side. I read the commitment point, the moment when the weight transferred and the strike locked in, visible in the interface as a positional indicator half a second before contact, and stepped inside the arc. Too close for the axe. He adjusted faster than Dirk, faster than anyone I'd faced, dropping the axe angle and driving his elbow toward my head. I ducked. Not enough. The elbow caught my temple. Health 79/00. The arena tilted briefly. The interface stayed stable even when my vision didn't, which was one of the stranger experiences the embodiment had produced. A sensory split between physical impact and informationational clarity. I could feel the hit. I could also see perfectly calmly in the overlay that Varric's left leg had overextended in the elbow drive, and he needed 0.6 seconds to recover his base. I didn't hit him. I moved left, forcing him to track me, burning his recovery time with repositioning rather than impact. He recovered and came again. We did this for 90 seconds. He hit me twice more, health 61/100, and I didn't land anything meaningful because meaningful required time I wasn't finding. The crowd was loud in the specific way crowds are when they're watching someone lose slowly. Then Ron went down on the left flank. Not out. He was conscious on one knee, his sword still up. But the Red Fawn fighter who'd taken him down was turning toward me, which changed the geometry entirely. 2-on-1 with Varric as the primary was a different equation than anything I prepared for. I did something that surprised me as I did it. I stopped moving, planted my feet in the center of the arena between the two stone outcroppings, and stood still. Dropped my sword to a low guard, looked at Varric. He read it as surrender or stupidity and came straight in at full speed, which was what I needed him to do. I went forward into the charge, not away from it. The direction that made no sense if you were playing defense, the direction that collapsed the axe's effective range entirely because you were inside it before it arrived. The second Red Fang fighter was 6 steps behind Verk and now had a problem. His own champion was between him and me. And at these speeds, in this space, there was no clean line. Varric and I hit each other at close range. He was stronger. I was reading the contact point. My shoulder drove into his sternum, not hard enough to stop him, but enough to redirect the momentum sideways into the right stone outcropping. His back hit stone. 1 second of stillness while his body processed what had happened to it. I hit the knee. The same target instinct as the minor bout, but deliberately this time. I had seen in the overlay that his lateral knee ligament showed a stress marker accumulated from a dozen previous bouts. The kind of micro damage that fighters ignored until they couldn't. It wasn't an injury. It was a tipping point. Varric went down. The second Red Fang fighter reached me. I was already at health 47 to 100 and not in a position to absorb much more. I didn't try. I moved towards Sten, who was still functional on the right flank, and recognized the geometry when it materialized in front of him. Toon 1 became Toon 2 at the price of me removing myself from the Varric problem and trusting that a man who had taken down the fastest fighter in the tournament would need more than 15 seconds to get upright. He needed 20. By then, the bout was called. The Red Fang section of the crowd produced a sound I had not heard from an orc audience before. Silence. Not the geological endorsement silence of Greystone. Not the recalculating silence of a crowd updating expectations. Just silence total complete. The silence of people who have witnessed something that doesn't fit any category they have and haven't yet built a new one. I walked back to the preparation hall with health 47/00 and stayed in the embodiment. While the elves handled Greystone, Selen took 22 seconds longer than against Black Shadow. He seemed almost relaxed about it. The final was in the afternoon, one-on-one as the major tournament format specified. Selen had won his individual bouts for 41 consecutive contests. I had won too. The crowd treated this discrepancy as obvious fact. Even the Arcos delegation, Lena, and a cluster of garrison soldiers who had made the journey to the neutral zone seemed to be operating on the assumption that the human champion would be the most interesting loss the tournament had produced. Selen entered from the opposite gate and walked to the center of the arena floor at the unhurried pace of someone arriving at a meeting he had called. He looked at me with what I can only describe as attention, not the predatory focus of Varric or the mechanical assessment of the Greystone fighters. Something more like curiosity carefully managed. He said, "You don't move like a human." I said, "Nothing." He said, "You see something we don't see. When you fight, you know what's coming before it comes." A pause. "Who are you?" I said, "The administrator." The silence that followed was different from the crowd silences I'd cataloged during the day. Selen's face changed in a way that faces change when a word lands on something old and heavy underneath the surface. He said very quietly, "The old one has returned." I said, "A new one." He looked at me for another 3 seconds. Then he raised his staff to a guard position and we fought. His first spell cast took 2.1 seconds and I was moving before the 1.5 second mark, closing the distance at an angle that forced him to break concentration or take the collision. He broke concentration, stepped back, reset, launched 3 rapid small discharge spells in succession. Fireballs the size of a fist, 0.4 seconds each, low power. I took the first around the arm, health 39100. Avoided the second. Took the third on the chest, health 21/100. The interface was very calm about this. I was less calm. The pain was real and my health was at a number that meant one more substantial hit ended the embodiment with a 30% IP penalty attached to it. I ran the math in 3 seconds. I had enough health for one more exchange. Maybe Selen had enough magical capacity to run rapid discharge spells for approximately 3 more minutes before fatigue affected his casting speed. 3 minutes against 20 seconds of my remaining margin wasn't a winnable equation on current terms. So I changed the terms. I came straight at him, walking, not running deliberately, visibly with no attempt to dodge or feint, accepting whatever he launched because at this health level another hit or two made no meaningful difference to the outcome. And the only thing that mattered was getting close enough that rapid discharge spells became the wrong tool. He cast twice. Both connected. Health 8 out of 100. I was in front of him. My hand closed on his staff. He could not charge a sustained spell with the casting focus compromised. Rapid discharge required clear arm movement. We were 6 and apart, both gripping the same piece of wood, both breathing hard. And the mathematical reality of the situation was that he had 10 times my magical capacity, and I was the one who had just walked through 2 spells to get here. He looked at me. I said, "You don't have to finish this." He said, after a long moment, "Neither do you." He released the staff. The arena master waited for a beat, then called it. The crowd noise was not the roar I'd heard after the team bouts. It was something stranger, a sustained building sound that moved through the different faction sections at different speeds, arriving at recognition unevenly. The way a truth arrives when it contradicts something people have believed for a long time. Lena was on her feet. I could see her in the interface's crowd overlay, which I hadn't known extended to spectators until that moment. Selen said while the arena master was still signaling quietly enough that only I could hear it. "The elves remember the administrators. We have waited a long time for a new one." A pause. "We should speak. There are things about the eastern ruins you need to know." I noted that and said nothing because the arena floor was not the place for that conversation. I left the embodiment standing in the center of the arena while the crowd was still resolving its reaction and came back to the kitchen table with my hands shaking slightly and the globe warm under them in a way it hadn't been before. The system posted the results. Major tournament complete. Result: humans arose. Champion faction. Political weight granted. Inter-faction council seat confirmed. Neutral zone trade rights active. IP bonus plus 40. CP bonus plus 50. And then below the summary, a second notification in a different format, smaller, colder, the typographic equivalent of something the system had not wanted to volunteer. Alert: Orc Clan Council Emergency Session convened. All 3 clans present. Reason: shared grievance. Temporary leadership appointed. Shaman Vorgak, Elder of the Westes. Projected military mobilization. 5 game days. I looked at that for a long time. I had unified the 3 Orc clans, not on purpose, not through diplomacy or strategy or anything resembling a plan. I had walked into their arena and beaten their fighters and their champion, and they had done the rest themselves, because that was what groups of people do when they agree on nothing except what they hate. IP 87, CP 45, balance 73. Aros was celebrating. I could hear it faintly through God's Gaze left running in the background. The city noise had changed register. The specific uplift of a population that has just learned its people want something. Marin, according to the political overlay, was in his office with the door closed and his hands very still on the desk. 5 days. 5 days. I ran the numbers 3 times because the first 2 didn't produce an answer I could work with. 1,500 orc berserkers from 3 consolidated clans against 160 functional soldiers behind stone walls that had never been designed for a siege of that scale. The garrison's walls were city walls built to deter raids, not absorb armies. The difference between those 2 things was approximately 1,300 berserkers. I pulled up the terrain overlay and started east of the city, moving west toward the orc staging grounds, looking for anything the static map summary hadn't shown me. The Gorge of Redstone appeared in the overlay as a topographical feature I had noticed before and filed without acting on a natural channel cutting through the scrubland between the orc steppes and Aros's western approach, formed by an old riverbed that had dried out enough centuries ago that the locals had stopped thinking of it as water-related and started thinking of it as Road 15M wide at the narrowest point. The orc advance would move through it because the alternative was a 3-day detour south around the Troll borderlands, and Varaka's mobilization timeline didn't carry 3 days of margin. 15M. I measured it twice. In 15M, you could put 20 soldiers shoulder to shoulder. You could put barriers and overhead positions and arrow lanes that didn't exist in open field. You could make 1,500 mean the same thing as 150 for as long as the structure held. I spent God's Gaze on the gorge walls for an hour, reading rock composition, stability ratings, the angle of the upper ledges. The system annotated everything. The left wall had a natural shelf at 8 m, wide enough for archers, accessible from the eastern approach. The right wall was more fractured, less stable, but the fracture lines ran in a direction that meant deliberate stress at the right points would bring sections down on the floor below. I looked at the troll construction teams. Gorm had 5 of them at the border site, professional stoneworkers who had been building fortifications for decades. They were not soldiers. They were better than soldiers for this specific problem. I sent Lena south again. 3rd trip in 2 weeks. She didn't complain. Lena was constitutionally incapable of complaining about a problem that had a solution attached to it. And I had learned to read her enthusiasm for travel as a reliable indicator that the situation was worse than she was letting on. Gorm received the request through her and sat with it for a long time. 5 stone workers for 2 days on loan to ROs to work a gorge 15 miles from the troll construction site. The professional cost was minimal. The question was why? I fed Lena the answer through the channel. Tell him what happens to the troll borderlands if the orc army reaches Arcos and Aros falls. She told him. Gorm did the geography in his head slowly, thoroughly, the way he did everything, and sent 5 workers and said he was sending 7 because 5 wasn't enough for 2 days. I spent 15 IP on omens across the 2-day construction window. Accelerated timing, structural guidance. 3 precise interventions at points where the stoneworkers needed to know something about the gorgeous composition that they hadn't brought instruments to measure. The barriers went up. The overhead positions were cut into the left wall shelf. The right wall's fracture lines were prepared. Ron took the garrison to the gorge on the morning of the 4th day and stood in the prepared position and looked at what the stoneworkers had done and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "This works if they come through the center." I said, "Through Mika, who was sitting in the garrison courtyard 3 miles away, they'll come through the center." Ron said, "You're sure?" I said, "Vorik is a pragmatist. The center is fastest. He'll send the first wave to test it and escalate when it holds." Another silence. "Then how many waves before it doesn't hold?" I said, "Enough. Hold the line long enough, and we won't need it to hold forever." He didn't ask what that meant. He started organizing the position. I had not looked at the eastern ruins closely. I had made that decision deliberately 3 weeks ago, and I had kept it the way you keep a decision you know is provisional, held at arm's length, revisited daily, never quite acted on. Selen's message changed the calculus. He had sent a physical note through an elven courier to the temple in Aro's address to Edito, which was how elven diplomatic communication apparently worked, routed through the most religiously significant figure in the destination settlement because elves had not updated their diplomatic protocols in 400 years and saw no reason to start. Edito had held the sealed note for half a day before Mika came to the temple and held out his hand without saying anything, which was how Mika communicated when he already knew what I needed before I asked. The note was brief. Selen's handwriting was the kind that suggested someone who had learned to write before the current script conventions existed and had never adjusted. Angular, precise, slightly wrong in ways that were consistent rather than careless. It said, "The ruins are not ruins. They are a storage system. The previous administrator built 7 instruments before the world was frozen. We destroyed 2. The other 5 are inside. One of them is not an instrument." I read that last sentence 3 times. One of them is not an instrument. I put the note down and opened God's gaze on the eastern ruins. I had avoided looking carefully. I looked carefully now. The structure resolved in the overlay is something my mind had been pattern matching to abandoned architecture and filing accordingly. Stone walls, collapsed sections, overgrown approaches. But the overlay showed what the visual didn't. The stone was not random. The collapse was not structural failure. The layout underneath the surface damage was geometric in a way that natural degradation didn't produce. Organized around a central chamber that the terrain from approach on 3 sides. In the central chamber, 5 objects, the system's annotation appeared beside each one. For red artifact, previous administrator classification, instrument status dormant. The 5th red entity, previous administrator classification, redacted status contained. I sat with that for a long time. Not an artifact, an entity contained. The system had not shown me this before. I went back through my observation logs. God's gaze records the duration and focus of every session and confirmed. I had never pointed God's gaze at the central chamber directly. I had looked at the ruins from the perimeter. I had read the system's summary flags. I had not looked at what was inside. Deliberate avoidance had turned out to be a different kind of examination. I had been not looking at something for 3 weeks, and the something had been in there the whole time. I checked the fourth artifact, the one Selen's note was most likely referencing, the one the system had flagged separately in the dormant cluster with an additional notation. Activation status partial external influence detected the nomads. The system had mentioned them in the initial status summary. A small non-faction population mobile operating in the eastern scrubland. They had reached the ruins. They had found the objects inside, and one of the artifacts, the one now annotated partial activation, had apparently found them back, the subjugation stone. The system translated the name from the ruins inscriptions with its characteristic absence of commentary, the way it reported everything, as though the name were no different from a geographic feature or a trade good rather than a description of what a thing did to people. God's gaze on the nomad camp. 43 individuals, mobile settlement, eastern scrubland, 7 miles from the ruins. They were moving west in a formation that wasn't how nomads moved. Too tight, too consistent. The specific geometry of people whose individual navigation had been replaced by a single direction toward Aros. From the east, 1,500 orcs from the west, 43 nomads from the east, both in motion, one by choice, one not. That was when Mika collapsed. God's gaze snapped back to Aros automatically. The system had a proximity alert for agents, a feature I hadn't known about until the moment it activated. Mika was on the harbor dock where he spent mornings, and he was on the ground, and the seamstress who was his mother was beside him, and the interface was reporting his neural sensitivity rating is spiking in a way I had no reference category for because I had never seen it do that before. A voice not mine something older in the channel I used to speak to Mika the direct line the door that opened easily, which apparently opened from both sides. The system posted an alert in the same cold format as always, which somehow made it worse. Alert external intrusion detected. Direct channel agent Mika source previous administrator status active. Threat level critical. I threw 25 IP at the channel. Not a targeted omen, just raw influence poured directly into the connection between Mika and me. Pressure against pressure. The system didn't give me a clean mechanic for this. It gave me a cost counter and a resistance rating and the functional equivalent of 2 hands braced against a door. The previous administrator pushed. I held the cost counter ran 5, 12, 18, 23, 25, IP, 80, 7 minus 15 gorge construction minus 25 channel defense equals 47. The resistance rating peaked and held and then slowly dropped. Mika came back to consciousness on the harbor dock with his mother's hands on his face, pale enough that the harbor workers had stopped what they were doing to watch. He lay still for a moment. Then he said quietly to the sky, "He's angry." I said through the channel, "I know. Are you hurt?" He said, "No, he's just very old and very angry." A pause. He said, "You found his things." I said, "Selen is going to the ruins to destroy the subjugation stone." Mika said he knows that too. Selen moved at dawn on the 5th day, which was the same morning Vorgaka's army reached the western approach to the gorge. I split my attention between both situations through God's gaze, running 2 simultaneous observation feeds at opposite ends of the map, which the system allowed but did not recommend. A small notation in the interface read, "Divided attention, reduced sensitivity," which I understood to mean I would miss things. I accepted that and watched both. In the gorge, Ron had the position set. 160 soldiers in a 15M channel, the left wall shelf carrying 40 archers, the right wall's fracture lines prepared and waiting. Vorgak stood at the head of 1,500 fighters and looked at the prepared position from 400M out and did not move for 6 minutes. He knew. He was not surprised. He was deciding whether the timeline allowed the detour south. It didn't, and he knew that too. He sent the first wave. 50 berserkers, Red Fong, Varric's clansmen, fast, the same unit profile I had beaten in the arena, but operating here in a channel that eliminated their speed advantage as completely as heavy armor had been eliminated in the arena by patience. 50 fighters in a 15M channel is a different problem than 50 fighters in an open field. The archers on the left shelf hit them from above before the first wave reached the barricade. Ron held the center. The stone workers' overhead positions on the right wall launched prepared stone sections at the 5-minute mark. Not the wall itself, not yet, but the pre-cut blocks Gorm's workers had positioned during the 2-day construction window. 19 of the 50 reached the barricade. The barricade held. The second wave was 100. The barricade cracked at the left join. Ron moved 3 fighters to compensate. I gave him that through Mika 1 IP. The precise location of the crack before it became a breach. The barricade held. The third wave was 200. Vorgak had stopped testing. The left join gave way. Orcs came through the breach. 6 of them, then 12. And Ron was at the breach with the 4 fighters nearest him, and it was not enough. I pressed embodiment 20 CP. The gorge was dark compared to the arena, overcast sky, stone walls blocking the light. The avatar materialized in the breach, and the 6 orcs already through it looked at the human who had appeared in front of them with the specific expression of fighters who have just been presented with an obstacle they hadn't been briefed on. I had health 100 out of 100 in approximately 4 minutes before the structural math of the breach became unmanageable. I read their stats in the first second. All 6 simultaneously. The interface handled multiple targets with the same comment applied to everything. No individual weaknesses as clean as Varix's knee or Hor's armpit. General patterns. They were fast, tired from the approach, and crowded by the breach geometry into a space where only 3 could engage at once. 3 at once was a problem I could work with. I worked it hit by hit, position by position. The Wanderer's body taking damage at a rate I tracked in the corner of my vision while I prioritized keeping the breach to 3 wide. Health 81. Health 69. Ron came in from the right side at the 2-minute mark and took the leftmost fighter off the line, which reduced 3 wide to 2 wide and changed the math. Health 54. Health 41. Health 29. In the eastern ruins, 7 miles away, Selen reached the central chamber. The subjugation stone destroyed itself. That was how the system recorded it. Passive voice. As though the destruction were the stone's own decision rather than whatever Selen had done to it. One moment, the partial activation notation was present in the overlay. The next it read, Artifact destroyed. Status inert. The nomads stopped moving. All 43 of them simultaneously in the middle of the eastern scrubland, as though a shared dream had ended, and they were all waking up in the same moment, in the same field with no clear memory of how they'd gotten there. Vorgak at the western end of the gorge watched his third wave stall, watched the breach hold somehow against the numbers he'd sent through it. Looked at the detour south and looked at his timeline and looked at the breach and made the calculation that old soldiers make when the first 3 answers don't work. He pulled the advance and sounded retreat, not defeat, strategic withdrawal. There was a difference, and Vorgak understood it, and his army understood it, and the gorge understood it in the specific way that geography understands the decisions made in it by remembering the marks they leave in stone. The avatar left the embodiment with health 22 out of 100, and I came back to the kitchen table and put my hands flat on the surface and stayed there for a while. IP 47 US 25 already spent minus the embodiment overhead the system charged at exit. 99 IP. The city's faith generation would run the number back up by tomorrow. It didn't make 9 feel like more than 9. The system posted results in the same format it always used. Gorge of Redstone engagement complete. Result: Orc advance halted. Strategic withdrawal confirmed. Nomad subjugation terminated. Source artifact destroyed. Balance 79/100. I looked at that last number for a long time. 79 higher than it had been since before the dome came up. The world was more stable than it had been in whatever passed for a long time here. Then I checked the eastern ruins. Selen was still in the central chamber. The 4 remaining dormant artifacts were present and intact. The entity in the 5th position, the contained classification, the redacted one, was present and intact. And its status notation had changed. It no longer read contained. It read aware.